what is the ground report and the picture as far as rural demand is concerned? How deep is going to be the impact of inflation, which is not going to ease anytime soon? Mayank Shah, Senior Category Head, Parle Products, is with us on the show today. Garima Kapoor, Chief Economist, Elara Capital, joins us. Akshay D Souza, CMO of Bizom, joining us today, as is Shirish Pardeshi, Senior Analyst, FMCG at Centrum Broking. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today. Let me begin with Garima Kapoor, who has been tracking rural demand very, very closely. Garima, what are your channel checks telling you on ground?
Thank you, Tamanna. We've been doing these channel checks ever since the onset of war started. And what we gathered was an initial period when the prices rose on the ground, they largely benefited large farmers and the cultivators. But when we dug deep across India, what we realized that there was actually a dichotomy. The cultivation part of the economy, especially rural economy, was doing very well. But the non-cultivation part of the economy, that is a wage economy, would continue to lag. Now, there is two segments to this. Within the rural economy, you have the non-agriculture economy. The non-agriculture trading economy, or small petty businessmen, or education economy, all of that was struggling, and there was still an after effect of pandemic that was felt. So clearly, that's why seeing a dichotomy or a divergence where tractor sales are doing well because the cultivation income, especially of large farmers, has thrived, whereas the non-cultivation income, especially the wage economy, has not done well, and that's why the two-wheeler sales are probably continuing to be sluggish.
On the other hand, Akshay, do you also see the impact? I mean, we played out for you all what Sanjeev Mehta is saying, what Sudhir Sitapati is saying. They're talking about how household incomes and capacities to buy have been impacted quite harshly because of COVID-19 pandemic, and inflation hasn't helped. What are the kind of details that you're seeing through your research?
Sure. So thanks for having me again, Tamanna. So one of the things that we did is we took an early dipstick into July, the first 2 weeks. And what it still shows us is there is still pressure. However, rural, if anybody, seems to be the first one will probably get out of it. I think we looked at as almost a 3.7% drop overall, and rural is just 1.7%, which means it's looking positive there. What it's kind of resulting in on ground really is we're seeing consumers in rural now, which were down trading across categories. For a select set of categories, they have now started picking up larger packs. I'll give you a classic example. Now you have classic commodity trading, right? Commodity packs. So let's look at edible oils. Edible oils over the last month in June have shown single-digit to even double-digit drop in prices, especially in palm oil, right? With Indonesia supply coming back, almost 18% drop in palm oil price, which is essentially used in Horeca and all the key B2B mediums, so to speak. Now that has resulted in a positive uptake of commodity because consumers were holding back on their purchases earlier, buying small in the hope of price reduction. And that has started happening in commodities and even a little bit in home care at the moment. Other categories, still down trading is on, but we do think that they will, kind of just follow if, the monsoons remain steady and rural incomes remain steady. That's important. And it's not just, when I say steady, I don't just mean adequate monsoon for the whole season. I mean steady monsoon through the season, which is something that we suffered from last year, right? We had erratic monsoon and that did even crop damage last season. So we need steady monsoon, and I think that will kind of take us through the festival season where we can kind of see demand really soaring at that point.
Okay. So what we are hoping to see is rural demand returning, but what would be the reasons that it would push back? Because like I said, the issues that are causing inflation are not going to go away anytime soon, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine conflict, global supply shocks, etc., crude prices. Shirish Pardeshi, on the other hand, you've seen this already impact FMCG companies, isn't it?
Thanks for having me on this show, Tamanna. Just to have a quick add on what Akshay has just mentioned, while speaking to channel partners, there is a pain, but we have to also look at the context that our Rabi crop was much higher, and even government has allowed to export. But midway, because of the food security, we have cut the export. So there is a pain point. I'm not denying about it, but we have to also see that the FCI buying, which was supposed to start by say month of April, that got delayed by another 15-20 days, and now I've been told that the FCI started paying back to the customers. So there is a delay which has happened, but I think I'm very hopeful that there is a recovery which is happening. Second, which Garima touched upon, that the latest number of the GDP number which came on, I think we have to see that non-farm income which is not growing, and I think there is a pressure point. Probably the non-farm income activities are slowed down, or maybe there is a recovery which will happen. And I think it's a effort which I think government is initiating, and that should hopefully reflect maybe the next season before we get into farming.
Mayank, you have a very different story as far as the last couple of weeks are going. You're seeing the tide turning.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, firstly, thank you. And if I have to look at the way things are panning out, our observation is that at a macro level, yes, the volumes are getting impacted. As far as FMCG sector is concerned. But when we go further, as in when we deep dive, the non-discretionary or essential part of FMCG is not getting affected. So when we talk about foods, that's not getting affected as much as the discretionary part, which is probably, the non-foods part. So the volume pressures that we are seeing is, it's typically coming from that part of FMCG rather than the foods. In fact, all my three co-panelists, Garima, Akshay, and Shirish have, partly touched upon, various subjects which are fueling or rather which are aiding the rural recovery or rural demand revival. First of it is, consistent monsoon that we are seeing this year that drives a lot of optimism. Secondly, I think, better realization of crop. So while I agree with Garima that, the non-agricultural income is an issue, but agricultural income has been good. And a beautiful thing that happened, probably either by design or default, I don't know that, was that initially government allowed exports. That was the time when harvest was happening and farmers got good price. After they sold it out to, probably middleman or the bigger guys, is when government bought in, for food security, some kind of, restriction. So exports were banned. So farmers have money in their hand. So they are going out and, spending. And thirdly, the onset of festive season, which we are all hopeful about. After 2 years of some kind of, concerns, issues, or muted celebrations, this would probably be the first year when, people would be going out and celebrating the festival. So these three things put together is driving the recovery of rural demand. So that's something that we have seen. Urban demand was relatively, less affected. If you look at the last 6 months of last financial year, rural was a concern. And that, to our mind, if you look at what's happening in, since last 3 months, we've seen a good recovery in rural.
But Mayank, it's still not answering the question of where the money is going to come from. We're betting once again on the monsoons, which is, the safety net for the Indian economy through the last many decades. That's not going to blunt the inflation impact beyond a point, is it?
No, but in fact, let's look at, so while we talk about inflation and the impact of it on household budgets, let's not forget that the same inflation and the result of the same inflation, the agri-commodity prices which went up has aided recovery in the rural. So, that has put more money in the hands of farmer. So that is a positive fallout. I mean, while there are many cons of inflation, but a positive fallout has been that farmers have realized better prices. So that part of economy, the rural, which was, actually a concern, you started seeing revival there. And even as we speak, I mean, despite of all, restrictions brought in by government on exports and stuff like that, the prices currently of agri commodities are ruling higher than what they were last year. So that way, I think, farmers have benefited. And since a large part of rural still depends on agriculture, we are hopeful that we'll see further revival in demand as we go further.
Akshay, what do you think are going to be the trends? You said you're seeing a pickup, but what are the categories in which you think demand and spends will improve? Because FMCG companies have gone through all the hoops, right? They've done the smaller packs, they've tried all of the regular ways of, pushing up demand, etc., even while increasing prices. That doesn't seem to be helping beyond a point. Where do you think, in which categories do you think we'll see the revival, Akshay?
So I think if you look at how the last 6 months have played ever since Jan, you would have seen a large, play on whole price-led growth, right? The brands have been trying innovative methods to pass on price to consumers straight away. Where you are now is at certain level, you're seeing the abnormal input pressure is kind of easing at the moment. Which means what? Does it mean that brands are possibly going to drop prices? Answer is no. Answer is no beyond products which are commodity products. For commodity products, obviously, yes, it will fall immediately. But for the non-commodity products, where it is one of the small input costs there, it is probably not going to fall. So I think that being the scenario, I think what you are going to see is there is going to be a lot of play in terms of bundling, in terms of consumer offers, in terms of higher value packs, which is all driving towards a whole consumption play, which is something that is a big challenge at the moment for the industry itself. So that consumption play is what will kind of eventually benefit customers at a per unit price, even though they may keep the pack price the same at the moment. So I think this whole bundled plus value pack play with schemes and customer play will, I think, come out, and that's going to be the play in terms of how consumption kind of will be growing going forward into Festive.
Okay. Garima, what is your take on, the directional approach? Do you think we can bank on festive demand to sort of pull things up over the next few months?
I think, Tamanna, a lot would depend on how the key areas such as UP perform, especially because the deficit there has been pretty steep at 55%. So and our channel check suggests that situation is quite dire. Farmers have actually planted the seeds and they're desperately hoping for some bountiful rainfall. Now, if you do anticipate that rainfalls eventually catch up. Okay, I might sound cliche, but UP does account for a reasonable part of consumer demand in India. Two, if you start to witness food prices come off, by which your real wages, okay, will start to reflect a better performance now versus what they have been for last 4 to 6 months, then automatically the purchasing power would start to look up. And commodity price inflation, which is cooling globally, would start to have a lagged impact on at least some of the commodities on the ground, and that, to our view, would actually start to reflect somewhat on positive sentiment for consumers. And in all of this, particularly if oil prices hold up where they are, they do not accelerate significantly, and if some states continue to correct their VAT, which they have not done, then actually on ground diesel prices would also be a big beneficiary. Ultimately, it's a very key input cost for the rural economy, especially the cultivation economy. So if some of these dots really, fall in line, I do anticipate probably Festive could look up, although the current quarter has not been as good.
Absolutely. We'll have to keep our fingers crossed that rural demand does revive. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the deep dive this evening on the India Development Debate.